So I've been watching this whole thing that's happening out in Hawaii. So there's a Hawaii, um, an article, and I got this out of Yahoo. See, and I always tell you where I get an article from. And if there's any statistics or anything in the article or outside of the article, I'll always pull those up. So I always let people know where my articles come from, or where it can be found a lot of times. And sometimes I give my own input, but this is not fake news either. So, for those of you who are worried about fake news people, I'm not a fake news person. I usually tell things from experience or things that I know are really happening. Um, and I try to be vocal about my own opinions. I let you know if it's an opinion that I have, and I'll give a little bit of my input. And then I'll talk about what other people's opinions are, because sometimes I'll pan down to the comment section. Other times I'll talk about things having to do with current events or politics. Uh, Never really are Yahoo. Ask, well, why would you talk about Hawaii? Well, the reason why I'm talking about this is because there are some people that have lost their homes because of this activity from this volcano. So, Hawaii volcano raises concerns of eruptions along the coast, and I've been reading, and it's amazing how something like this that you really rarely people focus on things like this, but you don't have any real control over this except but to seek uh, Geranios. So, excuse me if I said his name wrong, but in Spokane, Washington, the Associated Press, the eruption of a Hawaii volcano, Pacific Ring of Fire, has experts warily eyeing the volcanic region. So, the West Coast is home to an 800-mile, 1,300-kilometer chain of 13 volcanoes. The reason that goes to the reason why I'm interested in this, because when I was in college, I did a lot of science, and so I was really interested in, is what is called the Ring of Fire. So it's like they have these little volcanoes, and it's like a ring that it forms, and they call it the Ring of Fire, and so that's what it's referring to. So from Washington State, Mount Baker, to California's Lassen Park Peak, they include Mount St. Helens, whose spectacular 1980 eruption in the Pacific Northwest killed dozens of people and sent volcanic ash across the country, and massive Mount Rainier, which towers above the Seattle metro area. So there's certain ash and toxins that come from out of the volcano or out of the lava itself. You see it pictured here, and it spreads all over. And so right now everybody's comfortable and everything, and they're thinking about all these other issues, but that ash flies in the air everywhere, and it can go for miles and miles and miles. So I've been looking at it because I'm wondering if it would ever, you know, uh, send a chain of other threats. Now, I was reading too that there were several incidences where in California there were several earthquakes and they kind of were back to back. And so I'm noticing like right there after that, there was this activity from the volcano. And so this right here is showing California's volcano threat. And so this is, sometimes they have volcanoes that you don't really see any activity, but that doesn't mean that something can't happen. So I'm gonna kind of turn this on because I want to hear.
And the Long Valley region near Mammoth Lake.
I'll start it again.
It means these areas have a high population
of molten rock deep inside. Experts warn more destructive lava flows could soon hit the Big Island. 15 large fissures have opened up since the volcano erupted 8 days ago. Dozens of homes have been destroyed, and thousands of people were forced to evacuate. We have our fair share of volcanoes here in California, but they are very different from the types of volcanoes in Hawaii and a lot more dangerous.
As a matter of fact, the California Volcano Observatory has 3 in the highest risk category of very high threat. CBS 13's Lisa Meadows is in the newsroom tonight getting answers on what exactly that means. Lisa?
Yes, Tony and Christina, there are 20 volcanic regions across the state of California, but only a few are active and cause a real threat.
Most of the ones here in the West are explosive volcanoes.
Northern California is no stranger to volcanoes, although it's been a while since one has blown.
The last eruption in California was in 1915, Lassen Peak, and it had like a series of explosive eruptions.
And now with millions more people living in the danger zone, how catastrophic will it be when one erupts?
If it decides to erupt big, it will catch the world's attention.
Scientists have categorized 3 of our volcanoes as very high threat: Mount Shasta, Mount Lassen, and the Long Valley region near Mammoth Lakes. So what does that mean? It means these areas have a high population, lots of nearby infrastructure like dams, power plants, and a high volume of aircraft that fly in the area.
All these potentially active volcanoes, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of jumbo jets that fly over these every day.
The scale only examines potential damage, not timing. Geologists have a network of sensors to monitor volcanic activity, and many communities have disaster response plans in place.
That's really the best thing that can be done, because there's no stopping a volcanic eruption once it starts.
And eruptions like this may not be as far away as you think.
It's very likely that sometime in the near future, perhaps even in our lifetimes, it will erupt again.
Now, Mount Shasta actually erupts about every 300 years. So when it comes to that particular area, the last time that it did erupt was 1786, which means it's due coming up here within the next 68 years.
Well, good. We'll mark it on the calendar. My goodness. Lisa, thank you for that report. Very interesting.
Well, that's scary to know that it could erupt that, again. So that's sort of a bit of education about the volcano and how serious it could be. It could erupt again, is what they said. And so I just was looking at this. There's a lot of anxiety, it says here. It says the eruption of Hawaii volcano in the Pacific Ring of Fire has experts warily eyeing the volcanic peaks on the west coast of the U.S. And I noticed, too, that from what I was told by people who study or people who are into sciences and geology and how the world operates, in terms of these type of natural disasters. When one disaster happens, it kind of gives you a forewarning when something else is about to occur. And so I noticed that we had a couple of little earthquakes that were like back to back. I didn't even feel it, but some other people who lived closer to the earthquake zone could feel it. And so from what I've learned too is that usually when there's earthquakes, sometimes it can also trigger tsunamis. And everything seems to go hand in hand when it comes to these natural disasters like this. And so I noticed that one can trigger another natural disaster to happen. So here it's saying there's a chain of 13 volcanoes from Washington State Mount Baker to California Lassen Peak.
Scientists are keeping a close eye on Hawaii's
And
Kilauea
so
volcano.
let me
and the
stop that.
levels
That's
of
the
molten
video
rock deep
playing
inside.
again. So it goes on to say they include Mount St. Helens, whose spectacular eruption was in 1980 in the Pacific Northwest that killed dozens of people and sent volcanic ash across the country, and massive Mount Rainier, which towers above Seattle metro area. So people who are in Seattle area are a little closer to that. So this is one of those articles where you know, all of the videos are attached to it and everything like that. So it kind of turns itself on. So there's a lot of anxiety out there, said Liz Westby, geologist at the U.S. Geological Survey Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington. In the shadow of Mount St. Helens, they see destruction. I'm trying to stop that video. So they see the destruction and the people get nervous. So Kilauea on Hawaii's Big Island is threatening to blow its top in the coming days or weeks after spurting lava for a whole week, forcing 2,000 people to evacuate and destroying dozens of homes and threatening the geothermal plant. And so this is what I'm going to read here because it seems pretty heavy duty. Let me go back up because I wanted to know more about this myself, actually. You know, where do we fit in this? Because it says that experts fear that the volcano could hurl ash and boulders the size of refrigerators miles into the air. Here are some key things to know. What is the Ring of Fire? So this is pretty cool. So roughly 450 volcanoes make up a horseshoe-shaped belt with Kilauea situated in the middle. So the belt follows the coast. So it could also possibly forewarn of triggering chain reactions as well. So the belt follows the coast of the South America, North America, Eastern Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. It's known for its frequent volcanic and seismic activity caused by the colliding of the crustal plates. So that there are like plates that are connected to one another, tectonic plates, and some will go underneath a plate and some will kind of converge, sort of like smash into one another, and that can cause a number of natural disasters. Like, you know, I've heard of different forms of how they go on top of one another. Some will say it slides under one another, or there's a slip strike, or there's a what you call a rubbing together of plates. Well, sometimes when they can kind of jam into each other, one can pop up and then it creates this, you know, like an earthquake or a tsunami. They go hand in hand, sort of. And so it can create a lot of natural disaster, and it can also be the cause of some of what is going on with the volcanic activity, because it all kind of coincides, you know, because the little plates that you don't see that are pushing together, a lot of times they're, you know, under the ocean. And so there's a lot more to it. I know it probably is over the heads of some people, but I was really interested. I'm still kind of interested in that. I was thinking about going back and finishing up in terms of the sciences and stuff. I don't know if I want to actually get into a profession where science is involved, but because what I do is in the educational field, but I wouldn't mind getting into something like that because it actually interests me quite a bit. But images of the lava flowing from the ground, it talks about it. It says that the home's going up in flames. You can see that. A lot of people had to evacuate in Hawaii. They have stoked unease among its uneasiness among
on Hawaii's Kilauea
some of
volcano
the
and the levels of multiple
residents that are there. So they're worried because they had to evacuate, because I heard that even the air quality is, compromised because of the ash. And so that's the reason why a lot of people have had to seek, other means of where to stay. It goes on to say that Hawaii's has stoked unease among residents
on Hawaii's Kilauea volcano.
elsewhere along the Ring of Fire. But experts say an eruption on one section of the arc doesn't necessarily signal danger. So that's in other parts, but there are isolated systems, Westby said. So when will the West Coast volcanoes erupt? And so I guess they're talking about California pretty much, because we do have volcanoes. People are probably don't even think about it, but the volcanoes probably are due to erupts. Like she was saying, basically what's in this article is what the person in the news feed basically said, that 6 other Cascade volcanoes have been active in the past 300 years, including steam eruptions at Mount Rainier and Glacier Peak. In 1915, there was a blast at Lassen Peak that destroyed nearby ranches. So what kind of damage could they do? So it says up here, I'm kind of jumping around, all the mountains are considered active. Through what we see going on in Hawaii. And geologically speaking, these things seem to happen in the Northwest about every 100 years, said John Uford, a preparedness manager in the Washington Emergency Management Division. It's an exact timeline. So some geologists believe Mount St. Helens is most likely to erupt. Ooh, that's scary. Big Island scenes of rivers and lava snaking through the neighborhoods and spouting fountains of fire. You can just see it. It's like it just takes over and it leads a trail, and everywhere it touches, it just devours it, and it just, whatever it is, it destroys it and melts. And so it's pretty scary, and you can't get even near it because it's so hot and it's so toxic, and it probably, I would believe, it would wreak havoc on the respiratory system if you're close enough in the area and the ash and all of that is flying. So the lava is not hazardous per se, like in Hawaii, said Ian Lange, a retired University of Montana geology professor. The Cascade volcanoes produce a thicker, more vicious type of lava than Hawaiian volcanoes, so it doesn't run as far, Lang said. So that's scary though, because they even compare the lava to tell you which one is more dangerous than the other. So, which that I was unaware of, because I thought all of them must be dangerous. They're all about the same, lava is lava. But as they're saying here, one is more vicious, a vicious type of lava than the Hawaiian volcanoes. So the Cascade volcano can produce huge clouds of choking ash. That's scary. Yeah, that's what I said. It would wreak havoc on the respiratory system. And it sends this deadly mudslide into rivers and streams. So 2 of the most potentially destructive volcanoes are Mount St. Helens, north of Portland, Oregon metro area, which is 14,000 foot. Mount Rainier, which is visible from cities of Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. It's very scary. I did hear something about Seattle, and that would be a possible, if there's a natural disaster involving that volcano activity, that would be a possible one. Mount Rainier eruptions in the distant past have caused destruction as far as the west to Puget Sound, some 50 miles, 80 kilometers away. And so one triggers another problem. I do know that, like, when one thing happens, then it triggers the reaction of something else to happen, which is bad. And so it's even talking about it here. So I was looking, I'm interested because I want to know, because you never know about these things because you're not thinking about them, because you're thinking about all this other stuff having to do with people. But what about like natural disasters that really virtually nobody can do anything about it except seek safety? This is not an issue. It says, we don't know the size or scope of the event, Cross said, including which direction the eruption would occur. And so it says that this is not an issue in Orting, Washington, about 20 miles, 32 kilometers west of Mount Rainier. Orting would be directly in the path of Ehar. Local officials each year conduct drills in which children move from school to higher ground to escape the flow. That's what I would think. You would have to move to a higher level or a higher ground somewhere, even for like tsunamis, floods. But, you know, I've heard some tsunamis can be so bad that, you know, you don't have time to really run. It's very scary, but it goes on to say students usually take about 45 minutes to walk 2 miles to higher ground, which would be fast enough to escape, officials said. Our concern is ice and snow melting rapidly around Mount Rainier, said Chuck Morrison. So a resident of the town, 7,600, who has long been involved in evacuation planning. So we need a quick way off the valley floor. So Orting is the town's most vulnerable to IR damage. So I guess it's some kind of place where, you know, it's on a lower plane. So they would have to seek a higher portion of ground to take cover in that way. So Mount Rainier, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, scientists say that in the worst case, a 30-foot high, 9-meter high IR, excuse me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but I believe it might be right, consistency of wet concrete and rubble through Orting at 50 miles an hour. Wow, that's crazy. 80 kilometers per hour if volcanic activity suddenly melted snow and ice on Rainier. That's scary. So it's like really nothing you really can do about. See, these are things that there's nothing that you can do about. If they happen, they just happen, you know, and you have to find the best way to stay safe. And so that's basically the whole article. But I was just interested because it seemed like, wow, you know, this stuff's been happening. Is it a sign for something else? Now, what I have heard is that they're supposed to be, you know, they were scaring people. They're always doing these movies about earthquakes and stuff like that. And that last movie they did about this mega earthquake, they always have mega earthquake movies, and they had the wrestler The Rock in this last movie, and it was supposed to be a mega quake. It was like really crazy. I mean, there's really nowhere you can hide. You just have to accept your fate of death and die with dignity, pretty much, unless you're a superhero and you can do all that stuff The Rock was doing in that movie. Otherwise, there's really nowhere to run. So, you know, unless you're just really fortunate and you were lucky as hell to not be caught up in that, and somehow you were able to escape that craziness, because it seemed like everybody was perishing in that movie. I forget the name of the movie, but it was crazy. I did watch it. And then there was this movie called Geostorm. That was crazy. It's like, yeah, I don't think it really did well in the box office because it was supposed to be real. You know, when they advertise, I hate when they do that. When you see the cover of something or they show a trailer, you're all intrigued. You're like, wow, this is going to be a good movie. And then when you get out there to see it, it's a flop. It's not even what you expected it to be. So Geostorm was sort of like, well, they have like 9 tsunamis and 12 touchdowns of tornadoes. The tornadoes go through Tornado Alley and everywhere around the world. They have all these massive earthquakes, and then they have this fires being set off everywhere, floods everywhere. And then the people are just like, forget it. We can't stop this. We just have to die with dignity. And then you have like these tsunamis that are coming from every direction. It's like there's no running, no hiding, no time to do anything. And I think it didn't really go off well in the box office. That's why you don't hear very much about it. But I rented it out of Redbox, and it didn't really turn out like what they made it seem. They made it seem like it was going to be just really these mega things happening. It was stuff happening, but I guess the ending and all of the stuff in it, it really wasn't that. It didn't really, go off well. Something about it was really not that great. But anyway, this kind of stuff, you cannot outrun it. There's virtually nothing you can do except, try to do your best, to try to find cover or shelter or something like that. And who's like preparing for this stuff? Most people aren't. And so I know in California, they used to have people go and get these little kits, earthquake kits. And, once an earthquake is happened, that's when they start talking about, oh, we need to prepare and we need to do all this stuff. And then when there's no earthquake or nothing happens, everybody's quiet and they go back to their normal life like nothing happened until something happens again. And then everybody's out looking for earthquake kits, all kinds of flood kits, whatever, wherever you live, whatever. They're worried. So I would imagine like these people, they weren't prepared because you're not thinking, oh, I live next to a volcano, it's about to erupt. I personally, I always wanted to ask this question. Why do people live at a place that's called Tornado Alley? I never did understand why. It's just like, I bet they probably asked the same question. Why do you want to live in California when they say that you're living on the San Andreas Fault? So really, to be honest with you, there's really nowhere you can hide. I don't know a place where it's safe because everywhere you go, there's some kind of natural disaster that could happen. If it isn't a volcano, it could be an earthquake. If it isn't that, it could be the flood, like the flood that they had in Montecito, where it was a flood and then mud. There could be a place you live like in Sri Lanka where they have the tsunamis and stuff like that. If you live on a small island, or there's places where they have tornadoes and those tornadoes look really scary, and you see those tornado movies and Tornado, the Eye of the Storm, and it's really scary, and it's nothing you can do about any of those things. Those things are going to happen. You don't know really when they're going to happen. So you're not constantly preparing yourself for this great big volcanic eruption to happen. You're going on with life. Oh, I'm going to go to work tomorrow. Oh, I'm going to buy this shirt, or I'm going to buy this dress, or I'm going to go out to the store. You're not thinking about, oh, I got to prepare for this volcanic eruption because I could lose my house and all my belongings tomorrow. Nobody's thinking like that. So it's the same thing with earthquakes. Now, I will tell you, when I was here, when they had the Northridge earthquake, this is crazy. Now, this is the thing that now people are going to probably get upset because it's going to bring up the gun thing. I'm serious. People were scared And some people were like trying to figure out, oh, is there going to be another earthquake? People were holding on to the walls and scared, and you could feel the wherever you were, it was swaying back and forth, just swaying, and it was very scary. And you know how if you're on a roller coaster, you feel dizzy when you get off. Well, with the earthquake, it does something to you on the inside because already you're afraid because you're thinking when you hear all this talk about, oh, the big one's going to happen, you're wondering, is this the big one? Is this the leading up to the big one? And what am I going to do? You know, so you're scared. And you know, getting in your car is not a good idea because people get crazy on the road. They're scared, and it's going to be a bunch of traffic and people all jammed up and cussing each other out because they can't get by and all that. And they get panicked when there's a natural disaster and they're in their car and they start, you know, driving all crazy. The other thing is there were people, believe it or not, in the Northridge and some parts of Los Angeles that were breaking into places and looting. Believe it or not, when there's a natural disaster, you'll have crazy people who will decide, wow, police are strapped. Could happen in their city where they live, how to be prepared for it. I know it's been a while. I think the kit, I was gonna find out whether the kit expires, like stuff, you know, gets old and you have to replace it. Um, I do know when the Northridge earthquake had hit, there were freeways, and that was a scene that I'll never forget where people were on the freeway. I forget what freeway it was, but they were showing it on the news, and those people were dying because the freeway had part of the freeway had broke and split, and then you see this freeway and the rest of the road is gone. And then there's this nothing but a drop down, like if a car goes over it, that's it, those people die. And so they were showing it, people that were just dropping off the side of this freeway that had been destroyed. Part of it was destroyed, and those cars kept going, and until some people were stalled because they were seeing what was happening, and they realized, oh, there's no more part of the freeway, that this part is gone. And so some people died right, you know, in front of our eyes. We were looking at the news feed where it was showing these cars just going over, dropping. And, you know, when you're in your car, unless you have like some station on warning you about what's going on, you have no knowledge that, oh, you're in the middle of an earthquake or you're in the middle of a natural disaster. And you know, when you're in your car, you're thinking that you feel rocking, but you don't know if it's an earthquake. You're thinking, oh, it's just a high wind or whatever. And they probably didn't know. And so those people, they were dying on the freeway, dropping over the road, the side of the road. They were dropping. And it's hard to explain it, but if you can imagine a freeway and you have this big wide freeway and then half of it is gone and you can't see any more freeway. You know, there's just a portion of it because the rest of it is just gone from, you know, it cracked and it crumbled and there's nothing but rubble down there and people dying because they're dropping all the way down into that rubble and the concrete. And so you could see fires, you could see where people were showing like businesses where stuff everywhere was fallen and all over the floor. And then there was this apartment building where they showed where it had pancaked. And the news announcer was saying that the people that were inside underneath were sleeping. So they died in their sleep, not even knowing that the ceiling and roof and everything caved in on them. And so I remember that scene. It was very scary. And it's like, how would, you know, you never know these things are going to happen. And so that's why I guess maybe this should probably raise awareness for people to like maybe invest. Now that I'm looking at it more and more, they keep talking about it. It made me think, you know, maybe, you know, that maybe we should like probably talk more about what kind of things are other than the volcanic reaction. What about earthquakes, you know, and how do they go hand in hand with volcanic reaction like this? Because I do know I was really fascinated by that one old movie. What is it called? Pompeii or whatever. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but it was also about a volcano that erupted and all the people ended up dying. I don't know that they had any survivors, but there was this little pretty much a little it wasn't a town. I think it was like a big city, and all these people died and their bodies, I think their bodies turned to like some kind of hardened stone. And you could see how people were trying to cover themselves from the ash and the fire and all that kind of stuff. Because I think just the heat from the eruption of the volcanic reaction, that alone, without even lava or anything like that, that alone was pretty lethal. And the ash had pretty much darkened the sky because it was filled with ash. And so all that, the people were breathing it in their lungs. So that could kill people as well. And so I don't know. I hope that, you know, maybe at homes and they lost their house, everything they own. So you wonder, you know, did they, you know, what do they do with people that live in these kind of areas? You know, is that the reason why housing is so expensive? You know, because you have to pay for the insurance, I'm sure. If there's a chance of replacing that house, you know, if you can't afford to, then what happens to those people? Do they permanently become homeless or what? But I heard an article too earlier, and so this is not fake news, you guys. This Hawaii for all of these people that keep boasting about fake news. So I'm wondering, can they replace those homes? They did mention that they were going to try to ease up on people's mortgages. I'm like, ease up? Well, ease up meaning that they can't, you know, there's no house to pay a mortgage on. You know, why should they still pay their mortgage unless they're going to replace the house once all of the problem is cleared away. So I don't know that I would want to live back in an area like that, you know, because if it happened the one time, it's going to happen again. But people may say, oh, maybe not in our lifetime, you know, whatever, you know, but who knows? You never can say when those things are going to occur. And those things you really can't, you can't prepare enough for. It's like you got to constantly always be working yourself up to it. I know here in California, they have this law where they want all the buildings to be retrofitted. And believe it or not, now I mentioned stuff about slumlords. Well, the landlords were saying that it was too expensive to do retrofitting and that they wouldn't be able to afford to do that. So at the expense of, innocent lives of people who are living in unsafe quarters, because if there's an and the earthquake, it could do the same thing like the Northridge quake did to those people. They were sleeping in the building pretty much. It had no retrofitting. It collapsed. And I believe that was the reason why they started enforcing buildings be retrofitted. There's sort of like these spikes or whatever they do. They put inside of the building, sort of it's like a invisible net, sort of like. It's hard to explain, but it's to keep the building to where it's stable enough to withstand earthquakes. And so a lot of the building people who own buildings or property, they have this law where it was saying, well, actually a rule, cities will say that the building has to be retrofitted so it could be up to code. And I guess they get a fine if it isn't, or, the building could be viewed as unstable and unsafe place for people to live. So I guess they have certain zoning and codes and things like that. So for whatever the natural disaster that could occur in your state, city, town, whatever. So everybody's place of origin, wherever they stay at, is different, of course, what their rules are. So I'm wondering what their rules would be in Hawaii in terms of the whole, volcanic problems. I'm sure something's going to start coming out of this once it's all over and done with. There'll be probably some new, safety ordinances and things like that because of what damages has caused. And so I'm sure it's going to probably raise the prices of things too as well, because after natural disasters and to clean up everything, I'm sure. But I'm wondering too, what will happen if we do have what they quote unquote say the big one. What's the emergency response? From what I heard too, another thing that I have heard is that usually when they get on the news and say, everybody stay calm and all this kind of stuff, those people are already in their shelter and they seek shelter underground by the time that thing plays. They already have gotten far out of the location of wherever the danger is. So basically, civilians are the ones that are in danger and at risk. That's what I've heard. So I wonder if I believe that is true, because the president and his family, I think they have some kind of special shelter or something for them to stay in the event of some crazy natural disaster or some crazy, something really bad happens. But anyway, I don't know. It's just sad to see this happen to people. But with that being said, this raises a lot of alarms, it says, on the West Coast, which is talking about, Seattle and Oregon and places like that. And they did name a few other places. So, well, with that being said, like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for listening.